Call the meeting to order. There's something I do want to add to the agenda also. So is there any, Chrissy, could you just go click participants so we can see if there's any members of the public there?
Let's click on this.
Yeah, click that. And there you go. And then over to the right, is it, can't see, was it say 0?
0, yeah.
Okay.
Just leave it.
All right, so, we will, first item of business is the approval of the minutes from January. Is there a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Rowena. Seconded by Lorraine. Any comments, questions on the minutes, anything? All right, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 At this point, I'd like to add to the agenda the election of a chairperson for the pension board. So I will make a motion to add to the agenda the election of a chairperson to the pension and benefits board. And the vice chair, say.
So I'll second that.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to add this to the agenda. I'm just gonna take a vote on that. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Good, all right. So it is now on the agenda. And, at the last meeting, we discussed it. I mistakenly did not have Chrissy put this on the agenda. I did talk to Rowena. Rowena would be willing to take the chair, which I'm happy to relinquish. I'm also happy to stay on as vice chair, just in case Rowena can't make it. I'm usually in the building and available, so between the two of us, there should always either be a chair or vice chair able to run the meeting. So, am I correct in stating what I just said?
It is, although we left it open for anybody else to
Yeah.
step in. I take
Well,
that
I
as
didn't get
habit.
any other takers in the last month. So, I will, at this point, I'd like to nominate Rowena Moffett as the chairperson of the Pension and Benefits Board, seconded by Leland. Any other nominations from the floor? Anybody have an objection to that or any comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And honestly, as for the vice chair, I don't care. I'm just more out of convenience offering that I'd be willing to do that, but,
Thank you.
I nominate.
okay. All right, so it's been moved to nominate me. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any other nominations or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the agenda is yours, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay. Well, I only agreed to do this out of need or necessity. We're always looking for a candidate. Because I think I might be one of the longest tenured left. Except for Paul. I think I even threw your name in the ring, Paul. I just view this as a temporary period until people get all up to speed, and there are so many other people who are hopefully have more time to dedicate to this than you'll find that I will. And so having a vice chair is critical because there are times when I'm on trial and I just can't make meetings for a couple of times. So I apologize in advance. If you don't see me, it's not because I don't care and love you. It's just because I do have a lot of balls in the air at the moment. So with that, next is we did the meetings, discussion and possible action, plain administrative recommendation.
Plan, sorry.
Okay, is that Leanne?
Yes, it is.
Hi.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
Morning.
So last meeting, we had put before you a motion or a recommendation to approve a motion that the finance director and assistant finance director be plan administrators. And it was kind of like an either or thing. Whoever could do it, could do it. And the pension board wanted a little bit more clarity as to how that would actually be handled. And so this motion request in front of you today states that the finance director is the pension plan administrator. However, should that position be unavailable. With written instruction, the authority can be delegated to the assistant finance director. And if the assistant finance director acts on behalf as a plan administrator, she would have the full powers that a plan administrator has. And I want to thank Lorraine for helping me with that, because she sent me an email giving me some great suggestions. So I do appreciate that very much. And that's the motion that is in front of you all today.
So I'll make the motion to put it on up for discussion.
And I will second that.
Anybody have any questions or comments or anything on that? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm like running the meeting.
I'm perfectly happy. I have no problem with that. It takes a village, Carl, it's fine. So I'm reviewing the document, and I know that last time, we had some logistical questions. And, I'm looking for as you explained, Leanne, you made it clear that there's an assistant, a person who can help when at the moment you are unavailable to sign. There's something in here about that designation being in writing. How's the process practically gonna work?
So I would send an email to Amy and state that I'm going to be on vacation or whatever, and that I'm not able to perform the task as plan administrator, and that I hereby designate her to act in my place while I'm gone. And then I would put a time period. I think I said that I would put. I did.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, all right, yeah. So that's how it would work. And so it would be a designated time period, like, April 1st to April 8th. And then if something happens in that time period, then Amy can act as full, as a pension plan administrator.
So, all right, any comments or questions beyond that? Well, thank you very much for taking the time to redo that. And so I think we're now voting. So all in favor, say aye.
Right?
Any
Aye.
opposed?
Aye.
Anyone opposed or abstaining? So it is so moved or so approved. Thank you. All right, next up, Milliman. Yelena,
Yes, hello, good morning.
welcome. I'm sorry. I'm happy to see you alone, but I'm sorry to see you alone as well.
Yes, and I'm sorry I'm not there in person. The snow this week has really put a wrench in my schedule, but I am happy to be with you all and talk about the results of the 2025 valuation for year two pension plans. And yes, I'm Yelena Pelletier from Milliman. I'm sure remember Becky Seelman, who has been your actuary, but she is retiring in a few weeks. But I have been working alongside Becky in general for about 7 years and on your plan specifically for about the past year. So I'm up to speed, and I think you're in good hands there. Big shoes to fill, but I am ready for the task. So I'm going to share my screen. I think you all probably have the handouts, but I will see if I can figure this out. 1 second. Okay, did that work? Yes, okay, great. So as kind of a high level, when we do an actual valuation, we gather updated census data, updated asset information. We combine that with our actual assumptions, the plan provisions, and we calculate a liability for the plan. And just, I forgot to say, of course, you have two pension plans. I'm going to do the detailed presentation on the bigger town plan. And then I will just kind of more briefly go over the volunteer fire plan and highlight any differences, but the presentations are laid out very similarly. So I'm going to start with the town plan. And if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me as I go along. So we have the census data, the assets combined with our assumptions, plan provisions. We calculate a liability, and then we calculate an actuarially determined contribution, which is meant to bring the plan to a fully funded level over a reasonable period of time while, minimizing volatility for the town. So I'm going to go through each of those kind of inputs one by one. But before I do that, just to give you some highlights, you know, if you walk out and you forget most of what I said, the important things are on this page. And overall, it was a good, quiet year, you know, which we like. The assets did well. This is for 24-25 fiscal year. The assets returned a little over 10%. The funded ratio increased as a result of that. On the liability side, everything was fairly quiet. You had some plan changes previous years, but nothing this valuation year. And we do have 2 recommendations for you as far as assumptions and method changes. So that's kind of the big picture. And now I'm going to get into the details. So I can't really see what you're seeing for some reason, the way Zoom works. Are you seeing the slide with the member data?
Yes.
Yes, okay, good. So first, let's talk about the member data. What I'm showing you now is the population of the plan, both as of the most recent valuation and the prior 4 years. And we categorize the members by status. On the bottom in the dark blue, we have active members. So those are your employees. And as you know, the plan is open for police members, but closed for all other groups, meaning that new hires and other groups do not come into this pension plan, but for the police, they do come into the plan. So you, as of July 1, 2025, you had 68 active members. And you see that number actually increased from the prior year. And that was due to the fact that you had a few members transfer from police to the town group, and then you had some new police hires. So I think in a kind of regular year, you wouldn't really expect to see an increase in the member count. And you can see it had been decreasing. That had been the pattern just due to the fact that it's only the police group that is allowed to come into this plan. So that is the active members. Next, we have members in pay status. So these are your retirees that are collecting a monthly annuity, both regular retirees and there could be disabled retirees. You don't have any of those. And you do have a handful of beneficiaries. And those are members where the retiree had elected an annuity that continues to a beneficiary and has since passed away. So you have about 90, or you had 99 retirees as of July 1, 2025. And that number we kind of expect to grow over time. That's just what happens in a mature plan as members retire. And lastly, you have a small group of terminated members. These are either vested or non-vested due a return of contributions. So members who worked for the town have a benefit due, but have not started to collect that benefit. And that is kind of the smallest group with 18 members. As far as activity during the 24-25 fiscal year, you had 2 members terminate or retire, so kind of a quiet year, but you did have 7 new members come in. And like I mentioned, several moved from police to town, and you had 3 retiree deaths. So kind of a nothing major going on kind of year. The rest of the page is just showing you some more statistics on each of those groups. Are there any questions? All right, hearing none, I will move on to the assets. So like I started.
Excuse me.
Mhm.
I have one question on the
Sure.
police. In the past, they've had a choice of whether or not to go to the plan. And I'm just wondering if that has changed.
It hasn't changed.
Are all police going to the plan now?
I don't have data on it. I don't know who
No.
might have been hired and chosen not to go in the plan. I only have data on plan members. I don't know if somebody else can answer that question.
I can answer it. Not all the police have gone into the plan. I think we have 2 that have chosen the defined contribution plan.
Okay,
And one of the reasons for that is they might be retired from another department. And so they already have a defined benefit plan, so now they're interested in the defined contribution.
okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So looking at the asset returns over the last 5 years. So this last year was a good year at a little over 10%. The previous 2 years were similar good years. And then, of course, you recall the volatility, during the pandemic, the bad year, 21, 22, and the great year, 2021, which, of course, this is what the markets do, right? They have a good year, you have a bad year, you might have a few quiet years. In order to dampen that volatility, we smooth the returns. So our calculations of the contribution don't use the market value of assets. We use a smooth value, which we call the actuarial value of assets. And that just phases in any of those asset gains or losses over a 5-year period. And that's what this chart down here is illustrating. In the dark green, you can see, the market value of assets went down significantly when you had that, 21, 22 year, then went up, whereas the actual value of assets is smoother. It's just kind of gradually been going up. And here we are at the end of this 5-year period. You've recognized most of these losses. You now have more gains left to recognize than losses. So you're kind of through the bad impact of this bad year. So that's the good news. And in fact, over this 5-year period, if we look at what the compound return has been, you're almost 8%, which is, a bit higher than our assumed rate of 6.75. So that's the good news. And we do still have some more gains left to recognize because we're smoothing in these gains. We haven't reflected all of them. So we will continue to smooth them in over the next few years. And any new gains or losses that might happen, which of course, we don't know what that will be. Any questions on the assets? All right. Good. So moving on to the actuarial assumptions. So this graph might look familiar to you. One of the key, or I would say the most important assumption that we use in our valuation is the discount rate, or another way to say that, the expected rate of return on the assets in the long term. We were just talking about what the assets have actually done over the last few years, but this is our forward-looking assumption. What do we expect to happen over the next 20, 30 years? And the way we do this analysis is we look at the target asset allocation for the plan, which is what these bubbles on the top here represent. Each bubble is a separate asset class, with the green being various fixed income buckets and blue being equities. So, and it's mapped along according to the expected return on the vertical axis and the volatility on the horizontal axis. And what this is telling you is you have a well-diversified portfolio. You have a lot of these different bubbles along the various spectrum of returns and volatility. And when we combine that target asset allocation with our capital market assumptions, and again, we're looking at a long-term horizon, when you're hearing analysts talk about market returns, they might be talking about 5 or 10 years. We're really looking at 20 or 30 years because this plan is expected to pay benefits for several decades. So when we combine your allocation with our capital market assumptions, we expect a median, or you can think of this as the average return of about 6.9. And this is based on our assumptions as of June 30th, 2025. So that's just slightly above the assumption that we're using of 675. So we're very comfortable with that assumption, and we are not proposing any changes to it. The assumption I did mention that we do want to update is the mortality assumption. And I'll show you the numbers on that in a couple of pages, but essentially it's just a small update to the table that just slightly decreased liabilities. You might recall a few years ago, you switched to using the Pub 2010 table, and that is a table that's based specifically on experience for public plans across the country. It's a study that the Society of Actuaries performs, so it's, you know, an industry table. It's not specific to your population or Connecticut, but it is specific to public plans. So it's really the best fit, and I would say the gold standard for public plans like yours. So that was the 2010 table. Last year, they did an update to that reflecting 6 more years of data. So we're now at Pub 2016. So we're still kind of before the pandemic. So we're not reflecting any COVID impacts, but that is now the latest and greatest is the Pub 2016 table. So we do recommend moving to that. And I'll show you the numbers, but really it's just a small impact. So that's the assumptions. Any questions on that?
Is that assumption that 6.9% plan specific? Or what are you seeing across your municipal clients?
So it is partly plan specific, right? It's based on your target asset allocation. We have plans that are more aggressive, some are that are more conservative. So it's a combination of the current state of the market and the capital market assumptions and your plan's specific target asset allocation. We have seen that assumption lower over the last decade, which I'm sure you've dealt with that same thing of gradually lowering that interest rate assumption. And that has been the case for everyone. You're you're in good company. There's plenty of other plans that are at 6.5, 6.75, 6.9. This is kind of a common place to be. There are some a little lower, maybe 6.25. There's some that are still at 7. So you're certainly not an outlier with this assumption.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right, so let's start to put it all together a little bit. So now we're looking at the accrued liability for the plan. And the top 2 graphs are, the most recent year and the 4 previous years, and it's the same numbers. It's just here we have the total, and here we have it broken down by member status. You can see that the liability has gone up slowly over time, and we expect that to happen. As members accrue more benefits, as pays increase, we do expect this liability to grow over time. The liability did grow slightly more than we expected. We expected it to be at 33.9 million as of July 1, 2025. We had some losses due to pays being higher than expected. And then we did have that mortality update that I just mentioned that decreased the liability. So overall, we were just, a hair over where we expected to be. So kind of, again, a quiet year on the liability side. On the bottom, we are looking at the unfunded accrued liability, which is the difference between the actual value of assets and our liability. You can see that figure had been holding kind of steady. It went up a little bit last year, and that was primarily due to the plan changes that took place, and it decreased this year. Again, primarily due to the good asset returns and, just the progression of the funding policy. And same pattern here when we look at the funded ratio. So this is the ratio of the assets to the liabilities. And you have been kind of hanging around this 85% mark, and you are now at 86.1. And if everything continues as we expect, this ratio will increase steadily.
Excuse me, how does that compare to other pensions you're involved with? The funded ratio?
Yes, so the funded ratio is another thing that also varies quite significantly across the state. We have plans that are closer to 50% funded. There are plans that are 100% funded. I would say 86% is, a healthy place to be. The goal is to get to 100. And as long as you are contributing the amount that we calculate, I would say that you are on your way to that. So 86, I would say, is a good place. So we just keep working towards the 100% mark. All right. Any other questions on the liabilities or the funded status? Okay. So now we put this all together and we calculate the actuarially determined contribution. The number this year came out to 807,000, so that's slightly below what the contribution was last year. And it's made up of three pieces, and that's what we're showing on this top graph here. The bottom piece, this dark green, we call the normal cost, and that's the value of benefits accruing during the year. So those active members that are accruing another year of service, they're earning additional benefits, you're paying for that right away as they accrue those benefits. That's the normal cost. So over time, you will likely see this number decrease, as you've seen happening here over the last 5 years. And that's just because we expect the number of members to go down as only police members are left. And then when you get to that point, when you only have police members in this plan, the number will start to grow as pay increases every year. Currently, about half of this normal cost is for police members, just to give you a sense of, how much of the cost is for the closed group versus the open group. So the normal cost is about 322,000. The next piece we call the past service cost, and this is your payment towards that unfunded accrued liability that we were looking at on the prior page. So we have this underfunding, right? We're at 86% funded. We're working towards the 100. We're paying off that unfunded liability over a number of years. We're amortizing that unfunded accrued liability. And this is the second change that I wanted to talk to you about. So there's different ways to structure that payment of the unfunded accrued liability. You're never paying it off all at once, right? We want to minimize volatility. We want to pay it off over time. So similar to a mortgage, we amortize that over a number of years, and that number decreases every year. So at a certain point, you say, okay, I'm taking out a 20-year mortgage. Then you make your payment next year. You have 19 years left. The following year, you have 18 left, and so on. You currently have 14 years left on this mortgage, right? This payment that you're making towards the unfunded accrued liability. But the difference between a mortgage and a pension is that this number changes every year. You took out a mortgage, it was a fixed amount, how much you're paying off. Here, we kind of have a moving target, right? If we have a bad year, in the asset side, let's say you have another, negative 10%, hopefully not. But if that happens, our unfunded accrued liability is going to jump up all of a sudden. So if you let that amortization schedule keep running down, it's going to go to 14, 13, 12, etc. You're going to introduce volatility into the contribution because you're paying off a possibly large amount over a shorter period of time, right? The benefit of amortizing it is you have time to pay off any unexpected gains or losses. So when you get to a shorter amortization period, now any of those spikes are introducing possible volatility into your contribution. And as far as kind of what is the right number to have as your amortization period, we've kind of landed on somewhere between 10 and 15. Seems like kind of that just right spot, because you do want to pay this off eventually, right? You want to pay it off over something like the expected working lifetime of the members, but you don't want to have too much volatility. So what we're proposing is moving to a 15 layered base amortization method. And I'll move to the next page so I can actually show you some numbers. So this is kind of everything I've given you so far, but for the numbers people, instead of pictures, we have the numbers. And we have the impact by we've isolated each change individually. So these last two columns, the last column is what's showing this change to the layered amortization method. And again, what that layered method means is your current mortgage that you have, mortgage, the unfunded accrued liability, you will continue to pay that off on its current schedule. But any new gains or losses that develop with each valuation, you'll set up a new base and pay those off over a new 15-year cycle. So you kind of have these little layers, and each one you're paying off over 15 years. So that's what we're proposing. It still gets you to 100% funded, just with less volatility if there are unexpected gains or losses that come up. And you can see this year, the change in the contribution is small. To make this change, again, we're not doing it to lower or increase the contribution. We're doing it to mitigate possible future volatility. This year, like I said, is a quiet year, so there's not a lot of unexpected gains or losses. So making the change doesn't impact the number significantly this year. But in a future year, when there could be gains or losses, you would see a difference between staying with your current, just the one closed amortization period is what we have, what we call what you have now, versus moving to this layered base approach. So this is probably the most complicated thing that I had to explain to you today. So please let me know if you have questions.
I have a question. So are you saying on the unfunded, the line that says unfunded accrued liability, that is at 4,718,676?
Mhm.
That number is going to stay flat for the next 14 years?
No, I'm saying that okay, so let's back up. So as of the last valuation, you had, let's say, 5 million unfunded accrued liability, and you had 15 years left to pay that off. So you're going to continue to pay off this 5 million according to its schedule, where you had 14 years left this year, 13 next year, 12, and so on. You're going to continue to pay off whatever was there as of the last valuation.
Okay.
But
Right.
any new gains or losses, and what I mean by that is any difference between where we expected the unfunded liability to be, compared to where it actually is, that we call a gain or loss. So let's say we expected it to be at 4.8 million this year, but let's say the assets did poorly and it came out to 5 million again unfunded. That 200,000 difference would be the loss. And just that 200,000 loss would be the piece that we would amortize over a new 15-year period. And you would pay that 200,000 off over 15 years. You would still have the 5 million, you're still paying that off. So you're creating little layers for each unexpected change that happens every year. Instead of just saying, okay, this is where we are, and our total unfunded is what it is this year, and we're going to pay that off over a decreasing period every year.
So the 5 million will go to zero in 14 years.
Exactly.
And else will
Yes.
be later. Okay.
Yes.
So can I ask, are each of these tranches, I guess, are they paid going forward on a pari passu basis? So one doesn't have priority over the other. They each get an appropriate payment annually based upon their independent amortization schedule, but not with priority one versus the other.
No, we would just add them all up, and the sum of those would be your past service cost. So you would always be paying the sum of whatever those payments are. So it sounds more complicated, but it's meant to achieve the various goals that you want the funding policy to achieve, which is to bring the plan to be 100% funded, to do it over a reasonable time period, but manage volatility.
Just by way of catch up, could I just ask you, with everyone's indulgence, on the slide before, on
Sure.
the actual early determined contribution, can you just give a thumbnail sketch, please, of what's the driver between the 2024-25 at 381 for the past service cost that then jumps to 449, sort of that variable amount? What are the items that are changing that's controlling those dollars?
So I believe so that was the 2024 valuation last year when you had some plan changes for the police group and that increased liabilities. So if those changes weren't made, then the contribution wouldn't have jumped there.
So was it rich? The plan was somehow rich.
What's that?
The plan was somehow made more expensive.
Yep,
Yeah.
we added some incentives for stability. We did, instead of 25 years and out, it's 23 years and out. We did not increase the multiplier. But to actually achieve those increased benefits for an individual officer, they have to be here for 23 years. And you know, how many will actually be here for 23 years, but actuarially, it has to be reflected.
Got it. Thank you.
Right. So we changed our assumptions for when we assumed members would retire and reflected the fact that they're eligible for that benefit earlier.
I have a question on the layered amortization issue.
Yes. Mhm.
Are there some towns that are not adopting this type of an approach, and why?
So that's a good question. I actually have a lot of clients that are in a similar pattern of where they are in their amortization period, where they're hitting this, 14, 13 mark. And that's the reason why we're having the conversation this year as opposed to, some other year. It's because you're getting below 15 years and you could choose to say, no, we're comfortable now. We want to wait until we get to, let's say, 10 years. I haven't seen anybody let this amortization period go below 10 years because that really introduces a high volatility. The other alternatives is you could choose to reset it and say, okay, we're just going to go back to, I don't know, 20 years. But again, I don't really recommend that in your case because you are making good progress. So I've had this discussion with a few clients this year. So far, everyone I've talked to has agreed to go with this method. There isn't really a big negative that I can think of. I think that's kind of what your question is getting at is, what are the cons, excuse me, of switching to this method? It is a little bit more complicated and you would still have so this initial base, this 5 million, when that sort of falls off, when that gets paid off, there will be, some volatility still. That's maybe the only possible downside. But I don't have, any big cons to this method other than perhaps it being confusing.
That's what I was gonna say. I was just gonna say, if we're okay with someone else doing the math and making sure that they report on what the unfunded liability is every year and how that's being amortized, as long as we trust that math process, I don't see a downside.
We're happy to do the math.
And with the layered piece, it would seem that unless you really had 10 years of bad markets, that layered piece is probably never really gonna become a crazy number.
It shouldn't, right? If the years are mostly quiet and that new layer could be negative as well. I keep talking about a bad year because that's kind of what you're more worried about. But let's say you had a good year, you would have a gain. So you would have, a negative amortization to offset the 5 million that you're paying off already. You could have something that lowers it. So they could cancel each other out as well.
Okay.
So yeah, assuming nothing crazy happens, then yeah, the layer, usually the first one is the big one that you keep paying off. And then these new ones are just incremental increases that are smaller compared to the initial base.
So on the 5 million, we're calling it.
Yep.
No, I have no question. I think that is still the 5 million over 14 years amortized is still subject, obviously, to market valuations. It's
Right, so
it's not a fixed number.
the 5 million will be fixed, but then so the unfunded
Oh,
accrued liability is
right,
not fixed.
right, okay.
Yeah. So yes and no, but I think you got there.
So the 5 million will be fixed, and is that a static number for the next 14 years?
It will go down because each year you pay some of it off,
Okay.
right? So you have 5 million, let's say you pay 500,000 off. Next year you have, there's some interest, but ignoring that, next year you have 4.5 million.
Okay,
Following
right.
year you have 4 and so on.
Sorry.
So yeah. No, I totally understand that this is kind of a lot for 8:30 in the morning.
Well, and speaking of Leanne, on the updated mortality table, I remember, Leanne, we made the change so that we had flexibility on which mortality tables we used. Do we need to further revise the plan to reflect this particular table, or is the revision we did kind of like a living revision? I feel like it's the latter.
I think it's a living revision, and what we would, I think that we should do is after Elena gives us this presentation, she's asking us to, take into consideration the layered approach, and the latest table is that Pub 2016. So you would just vote to accept her recommendations. And Yelena, I guess the question back to you is, would you always use the most updated mortality table, or would there ever be an exception as to why you would not, since we have it in our policy stated that way?
So good questions. So there's different mortality tables used for different purposes within your plan. So I think what you're referring to, the plan amendment that you made recently, and that's actually this middle column here, was to update what mortality gets used for calculating the joint and survivor options when someone retires, primarily, right? Because the benefit is calculated to be paid as a life annuity, but members have the option to elect a joint and survivor annuity, and we do an adjustment. If you're going to take a joint and survivor annuity, then it's going to be a smaller dollar amount than a life annuity. So we have to do that conversion and use a mortality table to do that conversion. And that's something that's defined in your plan document, and that's exactly what you revised to be based on the latest table. The mortality table purpose that I'm talking about is to do our valuation. So these two don't necessarily have to be the same. So when we do our valuation, we are projecting how long we expect members to live when we're calculating a liability. So that's not something that's defined in your plan. That's our actuarial assumption. Now, the way your plan definition is now done is it is actually tied to our assumption, and that is the mechanism that keeps it always up to date. Now, the second part of the question is, would we ever not use something that is standard in the industry? It's possible. We do, we're supposed to use our actuarial judgment as to what assumptions we feel comfortable using. If the Society of Actuaries released some table that was based on a population that we didn't feel was a good proxy for your population for some reason, we could say, no, that's not an appropriate table for you. But really, for a plan that's, relatively small, when you're talking about mortality studies, this plan is small. We would always be using a standard industry table. So it's unlikely that if there was an update to this specific pub table that we would choose not to use it, but it's possible. Does that answer the question, or did that confuse things further?
It answered it for me, but I'm more
Okay.
concerned about what the
I know the
board
mortality
members
thing.
think.
The mortality thing is another somewhat confusing thing, that there are different purposes for what we use this mortality assumption.
I do have to say, I thought I was thinking along the same lines as Rowena was, that this was going to be, that this particular Pubs 216 was going to be an automatic update as well. But thank you for clarifying that that one will be reviewed every year, and that the pension board has to acknowledge that you use that in your assumptions. So I appreciate the explanation.
Good. And once we use it for evaluation, that's when it automatically starts being used for the joint and survivor options. And here you can see that that change just lowered liabilities by 200,000.
And
That's all.
typically that's because we're living less long from 2010,
Yes.
2016.
So I actually just listened to a webcast on this yesterday. So the mortality assumption has built into it an assumption for mortality improvement into the future. So we're living longer, but the mortality is not improving as fast as they previously assumed. So it's not that we're living less long, or no, shorter, if that's the right word. We are living longer, but not as long as they previously assumed would have, the improvement would be over the last 6 years since they updated the table.
They were overly optimistic in 2010.
Exactly. Yes, they were overly optimistic. Yep.
Well, I just saw in the paper that we're through the COVID mortality too. Like for life expectancy, took a hit during COVID and then now it's recovered.
Yeah. Yeah, the actual community is still kind of mixed on what the long-term impact post-COVID will be. They haven't really released any new tables incorporating anything post-COVID. So, stay tuned on that. But yeah, I think you're right that COVID is no longer in like the top 10 causes of death. And yeah, we're kind of past that.
Carl, the way I look at this whole thing as a board member, and I kind of take a step back and I see that we're a really well-funded plan and the plan is doing really well. And so I kind of have that vision of this. And then it comes down to, for me, I'm okay with either approach, a layered approach or the approach that we're using now. For me, it's really what makes it easier for the town to kind of keep track of and administer and keep, especially with retirements. I think we're really well funded. I think we're in a really good position. I think we're pretty well protected against volatility anyway. This is just an extra layer of protection. And so, depending on the town's cash flow and depending on the town's preference for how to deal with year-to-year fluctuations, I would be supportive of keeping it the same for simplicity's sake. Or if you're willing to kind of take on this layered approach in this year of transition, and really trusting our vendors to keep good tables and good information, I'm okay with that approach as well. So for me, it comes down to what does the town want to do? I'll be supportive.
So I have to say, I kind of like the layered approach. I mean, the markets have done nothing but go up for 8 years. And I worry about that a little bit. So I worry about down years, and I think volatility on the $5 million number that we were talking about, and an actuarially defined contribution being affected significantly. So I kind of I favor the layered approach because I don't think there's a downside, but that's just me. I'm one member of the board. Yelena, did what I just say make any sense at all?
Yeah, I think you both made very good points, and I would maybe frame the question as, do you do it this year or do you wait to do it? Because I don't think you want to just let this 15 years decrease indefinitely to 1. So it's maybe the question is, do you feel like this year is the right time to do it because 15 is your magic number, or do you want to let it kind of go down to something lower?
Elena, can I interject too? I mean, I favor the 15-year layered as well, but from a budget perspective. But if we were to go with this layered or at 15 years or 10 years, would we ever get to 100% funded?
You would, because you're still paying off that initial number over the same, you're not extending the amortization period of the initial base.
Okay.
Now, of course, markets do what they do. You could get to 100% funded and then you could go down to 90% funded, hopefully not. And when you get close to that 100% funded, we'll likely have a different discussion about what changes are appropriate at that time to make sure that you stay at 100% funded. But you are not, pushing this out indefinitely.
But again, if we don't add any layering to get to that 100% in a bad market year, the town's budget might have to fund an unfunded liability of twice this size. I mean, I'm asking, that sounds like a statement, it was more of a question.
Right. So if let's say this 5 million all of a sudden increased to 7 million, then you would be paying that 7 million off over a shorter time period. And that then in that year we might make a change. So you're not, if you make a decision to not make a change this year, you're not married to it forever. You can so you're not locking yourself in forever to keep decreasing this amortization
So
period.
you could almost pivot on a bad year to the layering.
We did that before. We had one bad year and we changed something. I don't know whether it was layering, but we did something to soften the blow.
Sure.
You know?
I mean, you're just pushing your liability down the road, hoping that the market's going to recover and that liability will disappear. So it's the liability is still there. You're just pushing it off with the layered approach.
Well, you're pushing it off because you're trying not to impact the mill rate as much. You're
Right.
not you're amortizing it so that there's not as big a blow to the budget.
Yeah,
That's
you're
the way
smoothing it out, I would say. Yeah.
And depending on the year, that could be significant. So, but I see we can. It's up to the board whether we want to do it this year or just revisit this, depending on what the markets do. We have that. It sounds like we have that option, which is kind of interesting.
I would
I-
like to see us go forward with the layered approach if there are no obvious disadvantages as a result of doing that. Why
Right.
not? We've got it on the table now. Why would we wait?
Right, because you can also have a negative amortization, as Elaine said. You can have a positive year where
Yeah,
we're assuming the bad stuff.
Right.
I mean, we're fixing our obligation with respect to the current accrued liability, right? And so if we can change it prospectively without much issue, I'm not sure why we don't endorse it today and start the process. And if for some reason there's an adverse consequence, we change it prospectively, which seems like we can do without much, issue.
Okay, so this is something where we're the board, I'm sorry.
You're gonna agree. What do you propose we consider?
Well, should be put on the table as a motion and then the board
Yeah.
can discuss whether we want to table it or whatever, or act on it.
Is there anything else, Yelena, you had planned to present?
I do want to show you just briefly the other plan. It's a much smaller plan. The numbers are much smaller, so I don't think it's going to impact your decision. But just for completeness, you do have the fire plan. I'm just
Sure.
bring that up. And I'm just skipping to the page with all the numbers. The materials that you have all the rest of the graphs. But this plan is not as well funded. It's at about 52% funded level. And you also had made some enhancements for this plan that had increased liabilities. Had as asset return of a similar level at about 10% this last year. It is completely open to new entrants, so it doesn't have that, half closed feature that your other plan has. So I'm just looking at my notes to see what the key differences are. But the liabilities are much smaller. The unfunded liability is a lot smaller than the other plan, and the contribution is therefore a lot smaller. So
And the total of the value of the assets from an actuarial approach is just under 2 million.
yes,
The value is somewhere near that. as
Oh,
well?
the market value, yeah, it was 2.1 million. So they're very close. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a small component.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And the contribution is, about 300,000.
Right.
And we do evaluation every other year for this plan. So that's why there's 2 years of contributions here.
But it looks like the difference between the ADC with or without the layered approach is not significant.
Yes,
Can't-
it's very small. And again, because that new layer is very small, so whether you amortize it over 14 or 15 years makes almost no difference. And again, we're doing it this year, not because we're reacting to something that happened in the market necessarily. We're just kind of bringing it up because you've gotten to 14 years on your schedule. And both plans are on the same schedule where they have 14 years currently left on your amortization.
Any questions on the fire component?
Just sorry, again, a fundamental question, why the huge disparity with the unfunded percentages between the two plans? And is there some sort of bellwether where, the town needs to, make sure that it's staying within some acceptable parameters when it comes to a challenge on the oversight of the plan or its fiduciary duty? 51% seems like there's some yellow lights flashing somewhere, but that's just an objective, uneducated perspective.
The fire department plan is a lot younger than the town plan. It's not as long, and it's a volunteer plan. And this board has been well aware over the years of that situation. And in fact, they decided to fully fund the fire department plan several years before they decided to fully fund the town plan for that very reason. So actuarially, we are putting 100% of whatever Milliman tells us to put toward that plan, and it will eventually get to 100%. From a cash flow perspective, we're putting aside $281,000 in actuarial determined contributions, but our payroll is, I mean, Amy's going to go over it in a moment, but I think it's like $110,000 per year. So we are accruing extra dollars to go towards the corpus of the plan in the fire department plan, and that has been our plan of action.
So just to pick up on something you said, Leanne, in my prior life, when I was in the private sector, and we had our 401k plan, we were at 338, I think is the right designation plan, so we had relinquished control of the plan optionality to our fiduciary. And as a result of that, our industry, our company, and our platform didn't have liability for the decisions. When I hear you say we're funding what Millman says, that doesn't insulate the town, though, on a challenge, if I understand correctly the plan structure that we have. It might be something that's beneficial, but it doesn't necessarily give the town insulation when there's a challenge, or if there's ever a challenge on the current plan structure.
I don't think that's accurate, because of.
I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, because of the purpose of the annual valuation by Milliman, as long as we use a accredited actuarial firm to analyze the plan on an annual basis, and that is what the actuarially determined contribution is for. It's to set it based
So
on.
I don't know, we were told no in the private industry. There are different fiduciaries and different plan structures. That's why we went with the 338, so that we didn't have the liability when our 400 employees came charging about issues on the plan. We could point to the fact that we are not making the decisions. We're having input, but we're not the ones who are making the investment decisions. So, and anyway, I raise it, I'm the newbie here, I don't really have any perspective other than to ask the question.
If I may, just the reason is because that's an ERISA plan.
Okay.
This is not an ERISA plan.
Okay,
And so the fiduciary liability kind of lies within the town and with the advisors that they hire to do all the.
different base, got it.
So.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah, we've been making the ADC on this plan for, I think, for the entirety of my administration.
Absolutely.
I don't ever recall not making it. It was the town side that we finally got to the recommended ABC. So we're building, because it's a younger plan, my understanding has always been that we're building towards fully funding, or I don't know if it's accurate to say it's fully funded or not, but we're at least making the ADC or ADEC.
It is it is considered fully funding, and that is considered best practice.
Yeah,
Great.
all right. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Sorry for the detour.
No, it's a good question. And when we're at the Board of Finance and we go over the pension plan, and we had an election and we had a bunch of new members, and they see 86%, they see 51%, I always make sure to say, hey, folks, just want you to know, we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing. We have been for years, and we anticipate that number to eventually get to 100%.
Yeah, I think you're both right. I think it's correct, I don't fault you for questioning it because that is, on the lower end, but you have a plan and you have in fact been making more than the ADC, slightly more, but I just pulled up our GASB report that shows actual versus the ADC. So you have been putting in at least the ADC for the past 10 years. And what we've been talking about, how that ADC is calculated, is exactly meant to bring the plan to 100% funded over a reasonable period.
But with the layered approach, we're gonna kind of refinance part of it for another 15-year period.
That's true.
So,
Well, maybe, depending on the markets, right? Is that?
Yeah, any new gains or losses. So again, on the other plan, it was a 5 million number. Here, let's say it's the 2 million number. You're going to keep paying off the 2 million according to its own schedule. And then any unexpected changes are what's going to set up that new base. And if we're doing a projection and we're expecting everything, all of our assumptions to come true, then there would be no new bases, right? It's only when something unexpected happens. And the question is, that unexpected piece, do you want to pay off according to whatever's left on your existing schedule, or do you want to pay that new piece off over 15 years?
So let me boil this down a little bit. On the layered approach, if over the course of the next 14 or 15 years, the market returns 6.75, or in this case, 6.5, will there be an additional obligation? Or are you not able to make that projection because there could be up years and down years?
Yeah, there could be up years and down years, but overall, you should get to 100% funded at about the same time. If on average you're returning the 6.5, 6.75, and there's, we're talking about the asset side, there's also gains or losses on the liability side, or so there's no plan changes. Everyone lives as long as we assume, et cetera. So if everything happens as we assume, now the assets are the more volatile side. Usually most of the gains or losses do come from the assets, but just to, we keep focusing on the assets, but just to remind you that you could also have unexpected changes in the liability due to either census experience, let's say you give everybody 10% raises or, something like that happen. That would also increase your liability.
Yeah.
Yelena, what I wonder with this plan is if it would make sense to do wait till 10 years to do a layered approach, particularly since we just we do a 10-year cost of living for all of these folks every 10 years. We just did that. And so I don't know if that would, obviously from a budgetary perspective, I don't want to have a lot of volatility, but maybe it makes more sense with this particular plan to have a different layering, or whatever you would recommend if we should have the same for both.
You don't have to have the same for both. If anything, because this is an open plan, I could see an argument for having a longer period because you expect people to work. If you look at the active population, their expected working lifetime is longer than the other plan. But on the other hand, because the plan is 50% funded, perhaps, you want to be more aggressive on paying off that underfunding. So that could be an argument for waiting longer to lower the amortization period. So, it's your decision. I'm just kind of here giving you pros and cons, I would say.
Okay, just so we can move to the motion and then the discussions phase, is there anything more you wanted to share with us in the
No.
initial presentation, Elena?
No, and yeah, just thank
Okay.
you for your time. I
Right.
know this has been a long discussion.
Well, and I'm not trying to cut the discussion short. I just wanted to do it in the context of a motion on the table, so please stand by.
Yes.
So then I think I'm looking for a motion, and might as well have the motion to cover, to adopt the Milliman recommendations with both the updated mortality table and the layered amortization. That's for motion purposes.
I'd like to make that motion.
Thanks, Paul. And the second?
Sure, I'll second.
Thank you. All right, so now it's on the table, and we're open to further discussion. I don't know whether it's appropriate, but do you two have any thoughts? Have you seen these approaches from other towns? It has to do a lot with how we're expecting the markets to do and whether we're gonna need this layered approach.
To be honest, I have not, but I do have full faith in what Milliman is recommending. So that's kind of out of don't want to speak out of school. It's their expertise, and I would defer to them.
If one of the considerations is whether we're trying to smooth potential market impact, is there any reason to think that the next few years will be more volatile than the last few years?
We would, that's part of our presentation. I think we're gonna go through some of the positives that Elena has really kind of highlighted. And one of the big things is that, I think she mentioned that the year 2022, which was a negative year, is going to be on the back end sort of the next 5-year smoothing. So that's gonna have less of an impact as we kind of move forward. So we'd expect, the funded ratio to actually increase further next year, if everything kind of holds as it is now. So that should be positive in terms of any of these changes that she's suggesting today for the town in relation to its ADEC and its management.
Which, if that were the sole consideration, that would weigh against needing a layering approach at this time.
But,
It's not the sole consideration. I'm just trying to make sure I understand the direction that it goes.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're in the discussion phase, Carl. Anybody else have questions or further thoughts on the motion that's on the table, which is to adopt both assumptions? The plan, the recommendation with both assumptions.
I would just like to say that, Yelena, you did such a fantastic job explaining that.
Oh, thank you
Really,
so
it's
much.
complicated and very understandable, and I'm very much in favor of it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, just from a discussion standpoint, I'm always happy to defer to people who know more than I, which is pretty much everybody. But I'm not seeing a compelling need to add. I like the refinancing analogy. I'm not seeing a compelling need to refinance at this moment future debt if there is a shortfall. What do the finance people on this group feel about that? Leanne, what do you think?
I support Milliman's, Yelena and I did talk about this obviously before it came forth, and I do support the layering recommendation for 15 years for both plans. But my position is, number one, I'm worried about the budget. I want to make sure that we have a very as predictable as possible stream of expenses going forward. And, I want to make sure that the pensioners and their pension plan is also funded. And so both of these goals are met. We will get to 100% eventually. And I do think it's going to, right now we've had quiet years and we can't see the volatility, but when you least expect it, it will happen. And so therefore my gut instinct is to go with the recommendation of Milliman. It's not going to hurt anything. It might be a little bit more complicated, But every year, Milliman, if, for example, in the town plan, if you were to divide it by 15 years, you're going to every year have 343,000 as part of our actuarially determined employer contribution. And then we can still see what every single year thereafter layers onto that. So I think that it's pretty easy to take a look at those numbers and quantify what effect that they're having on a year-by-year basis.
And speaking of the town's budget, where are we in the budgeting process? This is like $1 million with both plans. How would that fit?
We have budgeted these numbers that.
Exactly.
Sorry.
We're already through that.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, we're not through the budget. The public hearing is Tuesday. The referendum will be till March 12th or 13th, May 12th or 13th. But this is all baked in the cake, already, been presented to the Board of Finance.
With the layered number?
Not with the layered, with the layered number,
With the layered number, but honestly, there's $2,000 difference between the two numbers.
Yeah,
So
and
it's not really an effect.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion on the table, or anybody who wants to propose amendment?
I'm also in favor of it at this point, just because I think you're preparing for the unexpected. And if things perform well, there's no downside. There's an upside if they don't perform well from a budgetary point of view. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at it.
Okay, absent any further discussion, I think we're ready to vote. All in favor of the proposal, the motion, which is to adopt Milliman's plan, including the 2 recommendations of the updated mortality table and the layered amortization. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? Okay, so the motion is approved. Thank you. Thank you so much, Elena. That was a lovely first presentation for
Okay.
us.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the lively discussion and the great questions, and we'll work up the reports for you.
Thank you. Give our best to Becky on her way out.
Yeah.
Will do. Take care.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, I think we have to do the retirement and retiree deaths.
That's Amy.
Oh, no, payroll. No, I'm on the wrong section of this, sorry, I got 2 agendas right in here. Sorry, pension liaison report. Is
Hi,
that
good
next?
morning. How's everybody?
Hi.
So the pension payrolls and retirement status report had a lot of activity in the last month. So for starters, the February 1st pension payroll for the town, PD, and Board of Ed had 100 retirees and a gross monthly payroll of 178,000, which calculates to a $2,136,000 annual cost. That was 100 retirees and also 1 QDRO spouse, for a total of 101 participants. There was 1 addition in the last month, which was a Board of Ed custodian retiree, Daniel Briganti. The fire department had a total of 40 retirees plus 1 QDRO spouse, for a total of 41 participants. Their monthly gross expense was $16,945, and that calculates to an annual figure of $203,350. And to the point of what Elena was explaining, the ADC was 280,000, so approximately. So what we're contributing is more than meeting our annual expense. The town also paid out in February to a vested prior employee, Stephen Hackett. He opted to take a full cash out on his vested amount of $64,515. So he will not be taking a pension later. Moving on to the pending retirements and retiree deaths. Unfortunately, that's where we had the most activity in the last month. Kathy Marshall, which I believe was mentioned at the last meeting, did pass on January 16th. And Additionally, Judy Sherman passed away at the end of January on the 29th. And Nancy Lonergan passed away December 31st of 2025, but we weren't communicated, that wasn't communicated to us until February 2nd. So she has been overpaid, or, you know, her pension was overpaid, and we have reached out to her family on that. And then the last of this is Lillian Lucarelli, who was a beneficiary, passed on February 1st. She was beneficiary survivor to her husband, who had passed back in 2008. Melissa has sent out condolence letters from the board to all of these families. So that's done. The one new pending retirement is fire department, Sandra Jenkins, who became eligible in January, but she has not yet completed all of her paperwork, so she hasn't begun receiving payment. She won't receive the one for March because we don't have all our paperwork yet, but we will owe her catch-ups starting in January when we are able to add her to the payment schedule. In the current defined benefit and defined contribution plan of active employees as of the end of January, there is, in the defined benefit pension plan, 26 contributing police officers and 20 contributing town employees and 19 contributing Board of Ed employees, for a total of 65 participants. In the defined contribution 401A retirement plan, there are 47 contributing town employees and 33 Board of Ed employees, for a total of 80 active employees. And the total plan balance as of January 31st was $3,010,354. And the town's 457B plan had 89 active employees and a total plan balance of $5,828,084. 79% of the defined contribution participants have elected the additional employer match, which is 89% for the town and 64% for the Board of Ed. Anyone have?
Thank you very much. Is there something else?
Oh, just does anyone have any questions about any of those things?
The one thing that and Amy, I know you've now taken this over, but in terms of the previous month or the trend of pensioners and the trend of the dollar amounts going out, it might be, if there's a way to present that also, unless that's is that it? I don't think that's in the package here.
It's not. I can add that. That's a good idea.
Janet was doing that, so it would probably just be picking up on the template that she had.
Oh, this is her exact template. I didn't change it at all. So but I'll look back and just make sure.
She had a couple charts that she also submitted.
Oh, right. Yes. Okay. I know what you're talking about.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the transition. I'm sure it's been a challenge. We all will miss Janet.
Yeah. No, but honestly, I've really enjoyed getting to know a lot, to understand this all quite a lot better. And also thanks to Elena for her incredible presentation, because like added to my knowledge base, which I appreciate.
Well, thank you very much. All right, moving on. Morgan Stanley.
Great, so just want to kind of highlight some of the things from Milliman's presentation. First is, I know, Paul, you had asked the 86% funded, where does that sort of put you in the state? Well, Milliman does a report every year that looks at all the different connected municipalities, about 175 of them, and where the funded ratios are, discount rates, all that kind of stuff, and sort of has a averages. And from what I remember from last year's is that Old Saybrook was basically in the top 15 to 20% of funded ratio across the state. So it'll be interesting to see when that comes out. I think it comes out basically in like June or July. They usually do it. So we'll make sure to take a look at that when they publish it. And kind of as I mentioned before, the 86.1% funded for the For the town plan, it's highest level that we've seen. When we look at sort of the market value of the assets, it's greater than the actuarial value. So as I was kind of saying, as 2022 kind of moves off to be a lesser percentage of the overall 5-year return smoothing, you're going to see that funded ratio kind of move higher. And if we look at just from a market value perspective of where you guys were yesterday versus the liability, you'd be around 90%. So we'd expect that to go up, probably by another, at least, I'd say 2% or something like that as we go into the next fiscal year here. Apologies to anyone who was expecting the hard copies. I did bring some, with the weather and everything like that, it was very hard to get, them out. But if anyone wants hard copies, I brought a few here. And any questions about that before we kind of move on? And then just want to point out that we're going to have our capital market assumptions, Morgan Stanley's capital market assumptions are going to come out next month. And then we're going to use the report that Elena just went over to do our cash flow analysis in May. Right. So with that, I'll get into the market slides. All right, just want to go to page 2. So basically not much has changed in the forecast for the Global Investment Committee. Not a super bullish year. Certainly going to have much more muted expectations in terms of returns than we've seen in the last 3 years. We're expecting about 10% upside in the S&P 500. Kind of trading towards 7,500 as our base case, and that's basically around a 7% return from where we are today. If you look on page 3. Again, just kind of talking about, multiples kind of staying the same, the 10-year yield being basically where it is now at 4.05, inflation staying within 3%, and the dollar continuing to weaken, even though we're expecting maybe a second half bounce, but overall weakening on the year. If you go to page, let's see, page 7. There we go. So right-hand side of this chart, this goes back into, volatility, what are expectations for the markets going forward. This is a very, interesting chart here, which looks at, returns since 1983 to 2005. When you've had a trailing 3-year return of the S&P 500 that is over 20%, your next 5-year annualized return has generally been about 5.3%. Okay, so again, we're talking about much lower expectations, and this is in the face of, higher budget deficits, higher valuations. Yes, we have higher earnings as well, right? But the valuations, again, being, and then higher, you can see on the left-hand side, higher than average S&P, EPS growth. You want to turn to page 9. There's been a cyclical change. We talked about this kind of last month and going into year end in terms of leadership in the market. You can really see that from 23 to 25, information technology 167%, commercial services 192%, information technology down 8%, from basically the end of October until the end of last month, right? There's been a big change. So Caterpillar Tractor, I think I talked about this before, has outperformed NVIDIA the last 12 months by 80%. 80%. All right. So while the earnings expectations for tech continue to go up, the outsized returns that we've seen certainly have certainly come down. The earnings and the return expectations have come down. Page 11. This goes back to, the momentum, the lower quality rally that we saw at the last sort of half of last year. You can see the quality factor relative to momentum is pretty much at a low in the cycle here. And when we look at year-to-date performance as of basically beginning of February, you can see that momentum still had a very, very positive impact, and quality was detracting from the performance, right, of a lot of these indices. Now we feel like that's sort of started to reverse a little bit as we've gone into the latter half of the month here. And we'll kind of get into the more updated numbers. But it certainly has helped in terms of our performance relative to our IPS and certainly relative to the 60/40 benchmark for the month of February. Go to page 15. And if anyone has any questions, please let me know.
Kevin, sorry to interrupt
yeah.
everyone. I just have to jump for another meeting. So I just want to thank everyone for the great discussion, and I'll see everyone next month.
Thank you, Leland. We talked about unprofitable companies in the in Russell 2000. You can see it's still at 41.4, near an all-time high. Interest expense being a very, very high percentage of debt for small cap companies. So any sort of interest rate sensitivity is going to be very, very high for those type of that segment of the market. You go to page 21. The consumer is starting to be challenged. We talked about this kind of K-shaped recovery here, where the wealth effects of the top 10% of earners have really driven a lot of the consumer spending. But the bottom 90% of earners have had a really tough time. You look at delinquency rates on the lower right-hand side here. Okay, student loans really jacked up after the debt forgiveness was sort of postponed. And then if you look at credit card loans and auto loans, they're basically as high as they were during the great financial crisis of 2008, right? So this is something that certainly is concerning from a spending standpoint. And a lot of the GDP growth, as we talked about, has been in tech spending for data centers, for AI. That's driven a lot of the GDP growth over the last year. So if there's any sort of cracks in that, that's going to be something that's going to be detrimental to growth here in the U.S. Page 23, we've talked about this ad nauseum on the upper right-hand side. You can see the valuations, all near all-time highs. If you want to go to page 24, this is the cyclically adjusted price to earnings ratio on the left-hand scale, followed by the S&P 500 10-year forward return. And as you can see, they're very inverse. And we are at a higher than average price to earnings ratio here. So again, we'd expect returns for the next 10 years to be a little bit muted, going back to that kind of first chart that I spoke about. Any questions about that? So how this all relates to the portfolio, again, being diversified, not just from geographic regions and market segmentation, but from a sector standpoint, really important. And then having the diversification between the high quality fixed income instruments that we have and the high quality equities, we feel like it's going to be very, very beneficial as we go forward. Just kind of a few kind of touch points in terms of where we are. For the month of February, we're up about 1.53%. That's right in line with the IPS, and versus about 0.62 for the 60/40, so outperforming by about 90 basis points for the month. Year to date, we're up 3.22%. Again, right in line with the IPS, maybe lagging about 10-20 basis points, but outperforming the 60/40 by 170 basis points. And for the fiscal year to date, we're up 8.76%. So that's higher than the obviously 675 we are expecting. So we're kind of trending in the right direction again for another pretty solid year in the town portfolio. With that, I'll hand it over to Becky to get into the town report a little bit more.
Yeah, and so Kevin just went over the most recent numbers. What this data is as of January 31st. So, looking at the custom period, Kevin went over to the most recent numbers. Again, total, ending value, we are at all-time highs for the portfolio. So that's great news. Just a little mention on the bottom left-hand corner, and that shows the asset allocation. There was a $1 million withdrawal taken in the beginning of February. And so the asset allocation now is back in line with the IPS of about 65% equities and 35% fixed income and cash. If we look at the, year-to-date or the projected 12-month, income, it's, almost 700,000. Just a little side note, if you were to think about that 1 million withdrawal, just here at the beginning of, 2026, if you were to take into account, capital appreciation as well as, income that's come into the portfolio, we're almost net, for the year, which is, who knows what's gonna happen in terms of, the market for the rest of the quarter of the year, but, also really nice that we want to see that, with that, a major withdrawal like that, not a huge impact on the, market value of the account. The next page, we see this is 3-year risk versus return. And, again, we have that more, conservative, approach, trying to protect the downside in case we need it. Again, if you look at over the past 3 years, the portfolio, as we discussed earlier today, returned, almost 10% annualized. Kevin went over this, last time, and really the big takeaways in that top right-hand corner with protecting to the downside, in periods of loss. And then again, these numbers have been updated since there was, since there was withdrawals. And we've talked about the returns over time, updated on that, unless there's any questions. Kevin, this is,
Yeah, so I just want to point out, first, going back to the asset allocation on page 7, that's by style. So this is going to be what kind of like the targets of all the managers are. So that does not take into account the $1 million that we had to raise for the February 4th distribution. But if you want to go to page, to 10, this is the money weighted return. So we try to do everything on a time weighted rate of return, which doesn't take into account the cash flows like inflows and outflows of the portfolio. So we can really get a sense of how the portfolio or how the managers are performing relative to all the benchmarks that we have. This looks at the timing cash flows on page 10. So that's basically saying, like, if the market goes up and you sell in January and the market goes up, you're gonna have a lower dollar rate of return relative to your time weighted return. Conversely, if you sell in January and the market goes down, you have a higher dollar weighted return versus a lower time weighted return, et cetera. So the bottom line I think I want to take from here is that when you look at the return net of fees across all the different time periods, with the exception of the last 5 years, you're outperforming the 675 benchmark that you have in terms of the assumed rate of return. I think that's an important thing.
What's the $1 million withdrawal? It sounds like it's
Yeah,
standard, but
exactly. I'm sorry, that's what I wanted to ask. Becky, what is the $1 million withdrawal?
So that was for pension payments. That's for pension liabilities.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah,
So
about twice a year, when we get our ADC from the budget in July, we put that money directly into our cash account at Webster to pay our payroll. And then at another point in the year, we take out money in order to finish up the fiscal year. So that will just make our pension payments.
Thank you.
does that get redeposited through with town money?
Well, we are in a net outflow position from a cash flow perspective on the town plan. So, I forget what our monthly payment is, but we pay, over $1 million worth of pension payments per year, and we only put in 800,000. So we have to make up the difference from cash flow.
Leanne, did you tell me our monthly is about 150 we pay out to pensioners?
I can't remember what it is. Amy, what is it?
Yeah, the monthly for the towns is 178,000.
Okay.
And so annually it's a little over 2 million.
Okay. All right. Makes sense. Thank you.
just generally, we usually take it out in January, February.
Yeah, I'm sure it was a regular thing. I just wasn't, I remember you always do a great job pointing out that the portfolio throws off income to cover most of our expenses. So that's where I was confused.
Yeah, so if you go back to
The
page,
spending portfolio.
yeah. So if you go back to page 4, just to kind of look at the upper right-hand chart, right? This is the black line is the spending part of the portfolio, right? We're net spending more liabilities, right, that are being paid out, right? Because again, this is a partially closed plan, as we talked about. But we continue to have the asset growth. If you look on the kind of the middle part of the upper left-hand side, the last 5 years, you can see that even with all the net withdrawals we've actually had a teeny bit more income in the portfolio. And as kind of Becky pointed out before, we're getting 70% of the cash flow from the portfolio of the net payments that we have to make, that $1 million payment, right? We get $700,000 in interest and dividends that are coming into the portfolio. So we're really only taking out 1% of principal, right? Less than 1%, really, which is very sustainable over the longer period of time, regardless of whether we have good markets or bad markets. And that's by design in the portfolio and the spending. If this wasn't a spending portfolio, we'd have a different conversation of the types of risks or things that we want to take. But because it's a spending portfolio, we want to retain cash, so that's there, right?
And actually, oh, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yep.
Kevin? Actually, Rowena, so when we take the money out of the portfolio and we, as Leanne said, we put it into Webster, it is still making some interest income, so it's not just sitting there. Just so you know that, okay?
Thanks. Thanks, Kevin.
No problem. Yeah, if you want to go to page 11, just want to kind of point this out before we get to kind of the manager performance. We did make some changes last month and we continue to make them this month, where we added more towards our duration, so our intermediate maturity bonds, and took away from our high yield bonds. That has continued this month as well. I'd say just similar numbers. We're trying to get to more neutral duration on the portfolio, even though I'd say over the fiscal year, short-term bonds have done a teeny bit better than intermediate maturity bonds. And luckily, volatility in the bond arena, sort of in rates, has really been muted over the past year. It was obviously extremely volatile as we were in the years of 21, 22, 23, but it's since come down. So I think things are becoming a little bit more at least predictable in the short term here. That'll hand it back to Becky. Go over the manager performance.
Yeah, so on the manager performance, mostly looking at the year-to-date numbers. And all the strategies that have more of a lower volatility, higher quality, did not do as well as the benchmark as we would expect, given everything that we've talked about that happened in 2025, and some of it has continued here in 2026. But you will see, the month-to-date numbers, for some of the managers have become more even. So the Aerosol Value Equity, the Davis Advisors Large Cap, Johnny Hancock Large Cap, all within line, but below their benchmarks. One on the year to date of the outperformance is the London Income, London & Co Income, which was good to see. It's also really interesting if you look at the custom period, small caps, over 10%. And then the international equities at the bottom, if over, just almost 12% of the portfolio. Going down to the next page with the emerging markets, we can see on the custom period, 13.19%. Underperforming for the benchmark, and then the fixed income all holding in and doing very well, and all are respected between the short term, the intermediate term, and the high yield.
So just before we move on, I do want to point out the Lazard underperformance relative to its benchmark, because it's pretty significant in terms of the custom period here. If you remember, when emerging markets weren't doing as well, Lazard was actually one of the outperformers relative to its benchmark when emerging markets were, getting lower returns in the US, right? So their sort of, I think, portfolio positioning in terms of being underweight China mostly really helped them out during that period. Conversely, China was one of the best performing regions last year, and they were severely underweight. So that's why you're seeing a big discrepancy there.
So I look at Aristotle, And I mean, what about them? They consistently, I mean, I understand why the town may not hit its benchmark. We've had that discussion ad nauseum. But the funds should be on their benchmark.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think you had pointed out, or you wanted to point out, was
Yeah.
to do the peer analysis.
Yep.
So I don't know if you can like bring up Aristotle's profile page.
It'll just take me a second.
Yeah. So I sent it to Christie, like. I think I CC'd on
It was the subsequent email, right?
Yeah,
that's Yeah, guys.
Did they go out?
Yeah, she didn't send it out to us, but I sent it to her with.
Yeah, let me look at it from you.
Alright.
And I'm looking for the one that is Aristotle?
Yeah,
Aristotle, got it a little bit.
Do you need me to send it? That's what I just sent.
I think she has it.
Yeah, I'm just
There.
pulling it up.
Perfect.
Building, content.
Okay.
Alright, go to the next page. First page, this is like disclaimer, we always have to have that on there, so I apologize, but. There we go. Perfect. Let's go to the next, yeah, here we go. Okay, yep, the lower right hand side. This is the peer group analysis, you can see benchmark relative to the portfolio in terms of the large cap value universe. And there's a lot of different things that are considered large cap value, okay? Some are gonna be more dividend oriented, some are gonna be more, looking at price earnings multiples and price to book multiples that are lower than the market. So there's a kind of a wide variety of things that are within this universe. And as you can see, especially on the 1 year, they have, severely underperformed not only the benchmark, but the peer universe, right? But as we go over longer periods of time, they've done very, very well, right? So on the 7 year, they've outperformed the benchmark and been sort of in the top 50% of their peer group. On the 10 year, they're in the top 25% of their peer group and significantly outperformed the benchmark. We have not held them for 10 years, okay? But we feel like over longer periods of time, they're gonna do very, very well. I'd say some of the things that have sort of hurt them as they've been underweight healthcare and financials, which have been sort of the more value-oriented sectors in terms of this rotation that have really contributed to the Russell 1000 value performance. And you can see that on the next page, page 2. Go to the next page on the upper right hand side. There are weights in financials and healthcare especially. And they're over to information technology, which has had a tougher time to start this year, right? So this is just to kind of give you a sense, though, this is the kind of reports that we have every single quarter. And we don't have to include these every single meeting, but on the quarter, we certainly will include the updates so we can see exactly where everything sort of like, I'd say relatively looks in relation to their peer group. Maybe if you want to just bring up like Lazard, that might be helpful to kind of just lay it down.
I mean, I don't mean to extend the meeting here.
Well, I wanted to ask what these reports were about, so
Yeah.
thank you for giving
Yeah.
us the segue.
So these are Morgan Stanley. This is, I think, one of the strengths of Morgan Stanley is our global investment manager analysis team. So it's a team of 60 different analysts that their sole job is to do research on third-party investment managers. That's all they do. They do 450 site visits a year. They do all the quantitative and qualitative analysis to make sure that the manager should be allowed on our platform, right? And when we look at again Lazard in terms of their peer group analysis, you can see that on the 1 year and the 3 year doing much better than the benchmark and in the top 50% of their peers. on longer periods of time, a little bit more, I'd say, in line with the benchmark. And probably in the, I'd say 50 to 75% of the period. Any questions?
Anything else you wanted to highlight from these?
I think just, again, net positive is we're looking good again for this fiscal year. Very happy with the actuarial report. Certainly staying more cautious and staying more quality focused. We feel like if volatility continues to present itself as it has sort of the last, month, we feel like the portfolio is gonna do better relative to the benchmarks that we've had.
How was your meeting last time? After our meeting, how well attended?
Oh,
Was
great, yeah.
Yeah, we had a really good, thank you, Carl, for being there and kind of kicking us off with a really great introduction to everyone. And yeah, very, very good discussion, good attendance. Again, I think it's kind of the beginning of the year and having refreshments is a help. We had some follow-up appointments even on today, so some good one-on-one conversations and.
How many people stopped by?
I think we had 18.
Yeah,
Okay.
That's great.
it was definitely the highest we've had, for sure.
Great, thank you.
I do have a report, I don't know if it's still on the agenda, to go over the defined contribution plans. I can make it super quick if you want to go ahead.
Please.
Okay, let me find that. This is not the page. Now I have a whole bunch of pages open. Just give me 1 second.
Is it the plan investment review?
Yeah, it's, I'm actually, we have a summary that we go over, and I'm just trying to get to the,
There were a lot of dots this time.
just trying to get to the, okay, here, we did a summary, so you've seen the summary before. And, these numbers are lagging, Amy's numbers that she had brought up earlier, she was as of the end of January, this is the end of Q4 2025. So, at the end of the period for the 401A, including the forfeiture account, we had just 2.947 million in the 401A. For the 457, 5.677 million. And then combined, a total of 8.6 million for both the 401A and the 457. Again, looking at the participants, the 401A, obviously that's a mandatory contribution, 5% of every employee, which is matched 5% by the town. So that's 100% participation rate. Amy's numbers, these are lagging a little bit, and she has more granularity between Board of Ed and town in terms of the participation on the 457. This report shows 75%, and Amy's numbers were probably more up to date of the 79%. We do have a chart just showing it over time, really nice growth, given the contributions and increase in market value. For the blue line is the 401A, the orange line is 457, and the combined market. See those numbers there over time. And then if, just I can't reach that other page. Here we go. This is a very long report. We do it quarterly, which goes over all the funds that are offered to the participants. There's no need to go over, all 100+ pages. Just a couple of highlights is that the target date fund is the most used investment strategy, which is very good. We want to see that. It's something that we talk about every time we meet with a participant. If they're ever unsure of what to do, the target date fund is the best option. And then a whole bunch of data here on all the investment funds that are offered within the plans. There are the same lineup between the 457 and the 401A. And then most importantly, here's the monitoring criteria of all the investments. And this is all the behind the scenes to make sure that the funds are performing well. So we have criteria, 2 pages of criteria that they're measured against. We have changed funds in the past when they go on watch. Here you'll see the quarters that they have been on watch. Currently, we don't have anything as of Q4 2025 that is on watch, and nothing that qualifies for having 3 quarters consecutively on watch to recommend a change. And again, there's just, you have the materials in front of you, a tremendous amount of if you want to take this to bed at night to review it, but it is all the behind the scene work that we do.
I think we culled it down from like 150 pages to like 80 or something like that.
Well, thank you for that. Any questions for Morgan Stanley? All right, not hearing any. We're a little over time, but Leanne, we have very few meetings left with you, so I want to make sure I get your updates as often as I can.
Okay, well, I don't have any today. I'm sorry to say. I think that the focus was really on the Milliman report, and I did work with Yelena prior to that, and getting the pension plan administrator all set. But everything's going well. If anybody has any questions for me, certainly I'm happy to answer them. But I don't have anything in particular to report on today.
Well, thank you. Any other business anyone would like to address? Okay, hearing none, I think we take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Aye.
I assume we're all in favor? All right, we are adjourned. Thank you.